Welcome, social media.
Hi,
Thanks for
social
joining
media.
Veterans Breakfast Club.
Hey, Tom?
Yeah.
All right. 640-261.
I'll mute Dan. I will play the music. I'll
Just
let
for a minute,
people in.
Dan. Just for a minute, Dan. You tell him that phone number. We'll get him in the room. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Veterans Breakfast Club Happy Hour for Monday, October 10th. My name is Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming with the VBC. Very happy to have you all a part of the conversation tonight. We will be talking about the last battle of the Vietnam War with veterans of that incident, which was the Koh Tang Mayaguez Incident, Koh Tang being the island that the battle took place on, Mayaguez being the container ship that was seized. We will get into all of that. Joining us tonight is going to be the Koh Tang Mayaguez Veterans Organization, representative from that organization, Dan Hoffman, his cohort, Fred Morris, Bob Blow. We have many different veterans joining us. Also, veterans from our network who may not have met them were there or around that area at the time, and also probably have some things to interject. But good evening. Happy to see everybody tonight. Todd, it's great to see you. I know you were out and about today, so I didn't know if you'd be able to make it tonight.
Yeah, I had a great time with a fun group of people. They are the Pennsylvania Association of Financial Aid Administrators, and they had their annual meeting about 60 miles east of us, where we live here in Pittsburgh, at a ski resort, Seven Springs. They raise money every year for a charity, and this year they chose the Veterans Breakfast Club to raise money for. So I thought I should go out there and tell them what they're raising money for, and gave a little talk about the VBC, and it was a heck of a lot of fun. Met a woman who was in the Army during the Vietnam War, and a couple other veterans, and heard a couple other stories. So that's what I was doing, and I just got back here. So happy Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day, whatever you go by. Thanks for joining us tonight. And I see people who haven't joined us in a long time. Hold on a second, as well as some new people. And I just want to go through. Oh, Jim Wiley. Jim, thank you for joining us. I hope your dad is well. I'm looking at who else who hasn't joined. Boy, we got a Popeye looking guy.
George Niss, it's been quite
George
a while.
Kniss, haven't seen you in a long time. Good to see you, George. George will be joining us next week, because next week we're recognizing and talking about the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and George was part of that. That will be an interesting conversation. Also, I see somebody named Fire Tablet. Fire Tablet, are you connected, Fire Tablet, to the Mayaguez? I'm going to ask you to unmute. Yep, we got you.
Okay, Tom Noble. I was a young first-class petty officer at the time. I took a little gig into Koh Tang. I retired as 25 years Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy.
Wonderful. Lieutenant Commander, thank you. Commander Noble, thank you for joining us. This is terrific. And I see Julia Parsons is back with us. Hold on, I got to let Julia back in here. Julia, just for those of you who know, is a Navy wave in World War II. She's 100.5 years old. And hey, Julia, good to see you. You were gone for a while, and it was because your iPad was sick, right? I think that was the issue. You were fine, but your tablet had problems. Okay, so we're going to get to know some of the other people. Ford, get out of here, Ford. You've got another commitment. You can watch this on reruns. We want to hey, and seriously, we don't let people know enough. And I'm turning the show over to Sean, don't worry, but we don't let people know enough that all our programs, all of these programs are available, archived on our YouTube channel, and you can watch them at any time. If you have something else to do, come back, watch it later. So please do feel free to if you have other commitments. But I know Ford did not want to miss this program. So it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
We do. We have a lot of people in the room, which is great to see. What I'd like to do here before we get started into the program is I want to thank our sponsors. We always like to thank them here at the top of the program. We will take a station break at around 8 o'clock. But to start, first off, we want to thank D&D Metal Recycling and Auto Salvage. They've been a longtime supporter of the VBC and our programming. Couldn't do without you guys. They are wonderful. They're a small hauling and used auto parts operation in the Pittsburgh area here. They started in the late 1970s. They're a full metal recycling company now with 2 locations in Lawrenceville and Tarentum. If you are looking to have any metal taken care of, they can probably do it. If you need to call them or get a quote, you can do that through their website, dandautosalvage.com. Really wonderful group. And we thank them so much for the support of the VBC. Also, tobacco-free Adagio Health. They've also been quite a long time supporter of the VBC. They are dedicated to reducing and preventing tobacco use and to getting the word out about the hazards of smoking and secondhand smoke. They're all about health. So they want people to quit. And they do this through classes, nicotine replacement therapy, and a popular quit line, which you see there, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. They educate people, children especially, about tobacco use, from cigarettes, cigars, pipes, chew snuff, and other nicotine products like vaping. And finally, they advocate for public and private policies that ensure healthy places to live, work, and play. You can learn all about them at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. I think they recently just re-upped with another sponsorship, so thank you so much, Tobacco Free. We're going to have you back on the podcast, The Scuttlebutt, to talk all about your programs in the future, which the podcast I'd like to mention here at the top of the program. Recently, I just finished up this conversation and posted it about, this is Adam Zafuto, who you see there on the screen with me. Adam is an Army veteran of both the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. After the fall of Kabul, he sought out a way to heal the trauma that he was experiencing, and he decided to work through that with psychedelics. Him and I get into a very interesting conversation about his journey going out to California and going through several sessions of this. If you have ever heard about this, if you're like, what is that? It just sounds like, eating mushrooms on a hill. There's a lot more to it than that. And it's a lot more on the up and up than you would even believe. But Adam has a glowing review of using psychedelics to help heal his trauma. I highly recommend this conversation if you're interested. We'll put the link to that episode in the chat. Give it a listen. And also, do we have the gentleman here from the NFF, the National Flag Foundation?
Let's see. Do we have it? Ramel, are you here? Ramel.
Don't know if I saw Ramel join us.
If I see him join us, I'll let you know.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. We will then get back to what they have going on, the Light to Unite. And as Todd mentioned a little bit earlier, next Monday, we will have a special VBC happy hour on Monday night about the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm really looking forward to that program next Monday. But all of the announcements here out of the way and the welcomes, we'd like to welcome Dan Hoffman. Dan, I'm going to ask you to unmute Fred Morris, Robert Blow, Tom Noble. I know you're all sort of joining us from the Koh Tang Mayaguez Veterans Organization. Dan, you have a really great presentation here that's going to lead us through sort of the history of the Koh Tang incident and we'll talk about everyone's story. But Dan, I asked you to unmute. Let's see if that worked.
You got me now?
I got you now.
All right. I got you on the screen.
Wonderful. Here, hold on 1 second, because we had a script come to me at the very last second. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up, and I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint for you, Dan. But Dan, thank you so much for joining us. I reaching out to your organization, I wasn't quite sure if it would all work out, but you responded immediately when I emailed you. You said you got the right guy. So I was happy that you guys were able to come on, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Our pleasure. We're really excited and glad to be here. The last battle of the Vietnam War was May 15th, 1975. 2 weeks earlier, the war in Vietnam was supposedly over. the dramatic evacuation of the embassy in Saigon. And then on the 12th of May, rogue elements of the Cambodian Khmer Rouge Navy captured the SS Mayaguez, a U.S. flagged, unnamed, unarmed merchant ship. The Mayaguez was in international waters with a crew of 40 when it came under fire. She was captured and taken to a little island 27 miles off the coast of Cambodia with the border of Vietnam. The island was called Koh Tang. Fearing the possibility of another Pueblo incident, President Ford ordered immediate action. There was great concern that the members of the Mayaguez crew would be taken to the mainland and then their rescue would be extremely difficult. As a result, a hastily thrown together operation was rushed into action with totally incorrect intelligence. The ill-conceived battle plan, which unfortunately required joint operations between units that had never trained together, resulted in the deaths of 41 U.S. servicemen who hold the dubious honor of being the last 41 names on the Vietnam Memorial Wall. The only U.S. troops in the area were Marines on Okinawa, Japan. I was a junior second lieutenant with the 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines, when our unit was quickly called into action. Within a few hours, we were flown to Utaptao Air Base in Thailand, where our helicopter assault on Koh Tang Island would be launched. We were quickly formed up on the tarmac and issued live ammunition, including hand grenades, that were suddenly being passed out to everyone like candy. We knew then that we were going to be involved in something very serious. Intelligence had the crew on Koh Tang Island, with the Mayaguez being anchored just offshore. There were no maps available of the island. Our officers quickly put together a battle plan. Koh Tang Island is mostly dense jungle. The only place to land helicopters would be 2 small strips of beach sand on the northern end of the island. The assault would require a 2-hour trip from Utapao, Thailand to Koh Tang, utilizing the only large helicopters in Southeast Asia, U.S. Air Force HH-53s called the Jolly Green Giant. These helicopters and their crews were from special operations and search and rescue squadrons and had no experience even transporting Marines, let alone inserting them in an assault operation. But they were the only helicopters available that could carry that weight and could fly that distance. We were told not to worry, as the intelligence report had the island defended by only 15 to 20 local fishermen that might have automatic weapons. Well, everybody had an AK-47, which was automatic, but that's what we were told. The plan was to assault the island with 9 helicopters carrying my rifle company, Golf 29, along with the battalion command and staff elements, and initially 2 tubes of 81 millimeter mortars, which be our heaviest support weapons. 2 helicopters, each containing about 20 Marines, would land on the west beach, and the remaining 7 helicopters with 2 rifle platoons and the command element would simultaneously land on the east beach, then spread out and sweep through the island, rescuing the Mayaguez crew in the process. The helicopters that dropped us off would then fly back the 218 miles to Thailand, refuel and load up Echo Company, and then fly back to Koh Tang with the second wave to reinforce us on the island. More than a 4-hour round trip. The helicopters would then again fly back to Thailand, and our remaining rifle companies would be shuttled to Koh Tang late in the afternoon and evening. It was a grandiose plan that was unfortunately doomed from the start. With the exception of our senior officers and staff NCOs, our battalion had no combat experience. Remember, this is May of 1975. The CIA intelligence reports were inaccurate to say the least. Instead of less than 20 lightly armed fishermen, the island was defended by a reinforced battalion of over 400 Khmer Rouge specialized Marine troops who had years of combat experience, and they were heavily armed with heavy machine guns and mortars. The helicopter assaults were supposed to arrive just at dawn, but we were held up and came in after sunrise. The Khmer Rouge could hear us and they could see us coming, and unfortunately, they were ready for us. It was an immediate disaster. Using their heavy machine guns for well-dug-in defenses, the Cambodians literally blasted the first two helicopters in on East Beach out of the sky. The first one in exploded in a gigantic fireball that blew off the front end of the chopper. It crashed in about 5 feet of water, resulting in 13 killed and 13 more swimming out to a sea to avoid the heavy fire. The second chopper on East Beach had its tail radar blown off by a RPG, and 20 Marines and the Air Force crew of 5, several of whom were wounded, ran to the beach where they huddled in some rocks. They will remain isolated there for most of the day. They could have been easily overrun, but the experienced Khmer Rouge utilized superb fire support and discipline and let them stay there, surrounded, and used them as bait, where they were able to severely damage several more helicopters throughout the day who attempted to rescue those Marines on the East Beach. Things weren't much better on the West Beach landing zone. The first helicopter in was able to offload 20 Marines under heavy fire and then lift off. He was so severely damaged, however, that the chopper almost immediately crash landed in the water just after taking off, resulting in further loss of life. The second chopper in on West Beach received so much damage going in, he couldn't even land. The 20 Marines aboard, including our company commander, were subsequently picked up by another chopper, and they were taken back to Thailand. So on the first 5 minutes of action, all 4 helicopters of the first wave were shot down, and things were only going to get worse. That first helicopter on West Beach contained 2 of my best friends later in life, Al Bailey of Maryland and Fred Morris from Iowa. Both were wounded that day. They thought they were part of a major assault force of several helicopters, and instead were part of only 20 Marines, one of whom had been killed and several more wounded. They were in a tight defensive perimeter under heavy fire. At 7 a.m., the helicopter I was on was the next one in on West Beach. I was one of the first out the chopper, and immediately the Marine next to me was shot and severely wounded. We were in tall grass with the water of the Gulf of Thailand to our backs and dense jungle to our front. There was a lot of heavy fire coming our way, and at that point, we did good just to set up a defensive perimeter. By the way, the helo that put us in received so much damage that it barely made it back to Thailand and would not fly again that day. The American helicopter assets in Southeast Asia were quickly being put out of action, and this would have severe consequences later that night. The last 2 helicopters of the initial assault tried to get their Marines in. The first attempted to land several times, but the ground fire was too intense. In a move that would complicate our situation even more, he was able to offload 29 Marines about 1,500 yards south of our position. The helicopter contained our battalion commander, several staff officers, all their radiomen, the battalion doctor, with several corpsmen and 2 tubes of 81 millimeter mortars. They should have landed with everybody else, but they were now separated and stuck in their own defensive perimeter. Their situation was perilous, as most of them were armed only with 45 caliber pistols. They had only 3 Marines with M16s in that helicopter load, and it is very hard to fire and maneuver with only 3 rifles, poor air support, and a large enemy force separating you from the rest of your assault force. The last chopper attempted to land on West Beach at least 5 times. Each time he received intense enemy fire and couldn't get in. He was persistent though, and after an in-air refueling, finally got his Marines offloaded about 9:30, 2.5 hours later, and actually we took some wounded off the island. So 3.5 hours after the first choppers went in, we were separated into 3 groups. The 20 Marines and 5 Air Force crew tied down on East Beach, being used as bait for the helicopters trying to rescue them. The isolated command element pinned down with only 3 rifles, 1,500 yards south of our position, and less than 80 affected Marines, several of whom were wounded, in a horseshoe-shaped defensive perimeter, outgunned and pinned down with a vastly superior enemy force to our front, and the water with no place to go to our rear. We would not receive any more reinforcements for 2.5 hours. And that morning, we were dealing with major problems with communication and command and control issues, as well as lack of effective air support. All of these problems would later be studied, and the lessons learned would benefit future joint operations, but they just compounded our problems as we remained pinned down under heavy fire. Our most pressing problem was getting the isolated command element into our position. They had been slowly moving north. I volunteered to lead an assault on the bunkers between our two positions and started grabbing 10 guys to take with me. We left the perimeter heading south. I started leading this squad single file, hugging the shore and the tree line, the jungle being so dense you could barely move through it. We came around a point, and in front of us was a large log-covered bunker. I signaled to my men that we would crawl along the sand and get closer, and that I would throw a grenade. Then we would charge the bunker. I crawled as close as I could, stood up, threw the grenade right into the bunker, and emptied the magazine of my M16. Everybody immediately charged through and set up a defensive perimeter around that bunker. Inside were 3 enemy KIAs, their bodies, and a 90mm recoilless rifle, which is a large anti-tank gun. This was the last enemy position between us and the command element. In a few minutes, our battalion commander passed through, and shortly after that, we all proceeded back down the beach to our main position, taking the large recoilless rifle and our KIA with us. While this was happening, 3 helicopters came in and offloaded a portion of Echo Company. This is about 12:30 now. It was supposed to be 9 helicopters bringing in the whole company as the second wave, but there were only 3 helicopters left able to fly. I then learned that the Mayaguez crews had been rescued. They were released by the Cambodians when we started the initial attack. They were held on a large fishing boat and had never even been on Koh Tang Island. Now the problem was to get us Marines off the island. The decision was made to go, but it had to be all or nothing. Once the withdrawal started, we couldn't stop and leave a smaller number of Marines behind. The biggest problem was the number of helicopters available. The aircraft carrier Coral Sea had been steaming towards Koh Tang all day, and at this point was about a half hour away. So the Air Force helos could, although they've never landed on a aircraft carrier, they could drop us off on the carrier instead of the 4-hour round trip to Thailand and back. Of course, we couldn't afford to lose any more of those Jolly Greens and for them to get shot up or be put out of action. The situation had been improving as we now had slow-moving air controllers flying above us in OV-10 Broncos and accurately directing air and naval gunfire on the enemy. It was starting to get dark, and Echo Company would be pulled out first. The first 2 helos came in, and immediately the enemy fire increased dramatically. Under very heavy fire, 2 helos were overloaded with Marines, and they took off. We now dug in to wait for those choppers to return. My CO said, "Dan, you get out on this next one." It was now very dark, and the tide had come in. The beach we landed on was now mostly underwater. There was no room for the helicopters to land, so the pilots just hovered on top of the waves as we went through the waist-deep, rocky water to climb up on the back ramp of the helicopter, all the while under heavy fire. Several more guys got wounded, but the helo was able to pull out. There were 35 of us aboard that HH-53. 25 is the official maximum safe load, so we were definitely overloaded. As we pulled out, I looked back and saw several lines of machine gun tracer bullets coming towards us. It looked like Christmas with red and green tracers, the green tracers being, of course, from the enemy guns. But there was a significant number of our fire going back at them, including machine gun fire from a small boat from the destroyer Wilson that had it was led by a former swift boat sailor named Tom Noble from Indiana. This boat was the captain's gig, all shiny brass and ropes, dressed up. It was used to deliver mail, take officers back and forth in port. It was not decked out for combat at all. And the swiftboat sailor and a couple other guys who had seen action in Vietnam, there's a picture of Tom there on the left with his M60 machine gun. Is that not gung-ho? Tom got Bronze Star Award that day. Tom is from Noblesville, Indiana. We pulled out and away from the island. I was in the rear of the helo looking out. It was very dark, overcast, with no moon. We settled down for what I understood would have been a 20-minute ride to the Coral Sea. Suddenly, the helicopter was shaking and moving violently. I could see waves in the ocean as we were losing altitude. I thought we were going to crash in the water. I was pushed towards the front of the chopper to the small exit door behind the pilot. I jumped out expecting to hit the water, but instead we were on the deck of a very small ship, a destroyer escort, USS Harold E. Holt. The pilot had miraculously squeezed his very large chopper into this tiny helipad. I learned later it was officially impossible to do. While the ship was underway in near total darkness, this pilot had inched his overloaded helo in on a 45-degree angle and just touched down. His nose in one corner of the helipad and his two side wheels in the opposite corners. The helo was so much bigger than the landing pad that the rear ramp was hanging out over the ocean, and all I could see was water. This heroic pilot only had about 6 inches of clearance for his rotors, and the HH-53 was so heavy, he had to keep 50% power on his wheels. He literally was just touching down on the moving ship while flying forward at a 45-degree angle in the dark. It was an amazing feat of flying, and after he dropped us off, he immediately went right back into the heavy fire on the beach to extract 37 more Marines. If not for his heroic actions, there would have been many more names on the wall. He personally saved my life and the lives of 71 other Marines. His name is Bob Blau, and he's with us tonight. He's from Tennessee, and I'm proud to have him as one of my best friends. Can we say hi to Bob?
Hi, Bob, and I apologize for mispronouncing your last name.
Bob Blau extracted his second load at 7:30 p.m. There were now only 29 Marines left in the shrinking perimeter. As they slowly pulled back, the enemy moved forward into the fighting positions of our guys who had worked so hard to dig and build on that during the day. It got very tense for that last group, waiting for a helicopter to come back for them. Finally, at 9:10 that night, they were pulled out. In the chaos and heavy fire of the last extraction, somehow 3 Marines from Echo Company, not our golf company, they were left behind. It was assumed that they had been killed during the extraction, but reports surfaced years later that the 3 had been captured, tortured, and killed. When I learned of this, it started me on a downward spiral with post-traumatic stress disorder that almost took my life. Like most of the guys in 2-9, I got out when my enlistment was up, and I went back into civilian life to a wife and family. And during the late 70s and 80s, had almost no contact with any fellow veterans. The mood of the country back then was very anti-military, and we just didn't talk about experiences very much, if at all. Didn't even have a decal on the car in those days. In the late 90s, I started to have a few problems. I couldn't sleep, was drinking too much, and had issues with anger and stress at work and in my marriage. I became depressed and withdrawn and gained a lot of weight. I was suffering from what would be identified as post-traumatic stress disorder, but at that time, they didn't even know what it was. I was very lucky to belong to several veterans organizations, including the American Legion and the Marine Corps League. It was there I felt more at home with guys who had gone through things similar to me. We had a common bond, and even if we didn't talk much about it, we understood each other. But my situation was slowly getting worse. One of the things that kept me going when I couldn't sleep at night I'd stare at the ceiling and imagine that I could meet the Air Force pilot that saved my life on Koh Tang and buy him a beer. I spent many hours imagining that, and over the years, it changed from a drink to a whole bottle of Crown Royal that we could sit and share together. But it was only a dream, and I didn't even know his name or how to find him. In 1995, a new book about the Mayaguez operation was published. I read it and learned much about the operation that I didn't know. But the author presented detailed information, albeit from questionable sources, that the 3 Marines had actually been left alive on Koh Tang. Learning this for the first time, my issues with PTSD became significantly worse. I was missing work, arguing and fighting, and drinking too much. At my worst point, I couldn't even get out of bed. I became suicidal and dangerous to myself and others. It eventually cost me my first marriage. But for years, I struggled on. I lost both of my parents in a very short period of time. Since I was so bad off, I couldn't even take care of them in their final days. Then my lovely second wife, Betty, was diagnosed with breast cancer. Many things were weighing heavily. Finally, it was with the help of a fellow Marine who convinced me to get my veterans disability benefits so that I could then be in a position to go out and help others. I checked myself into the VA hospital, and over the next 2 years, with the love and support of my wife, excellent doctors and therapy at the VA, and most importantly, the love and support of my fellow veterans, I was able to turn my life around to the point now that I'm a national advocate for helping veterans get their VA benefits, and especially helping others with PTSD. In 2003, through the internet, I met Larry Barnett from Ohio. Is Larry with us tonight? He was on starting a Koh Tang Veterans website. He had been with the Marines shot down on East Beach. We finally got face to face with each other at a reunion in Florida of the Jolly Green Giants. The first night together, we were out on the beach tracing lines in the sand in an attempt to possibly figure out how our 3 comrades could have been left behind. That question has weighed heavily on our minds. The best thing to come out of that reunion was that I finally got to meet Bob Blau, the helicopter pilot who rescued us off the island. I had a plaque made up and got permission from the Jolly's president to surprise Bob with a presentation at their formal banquet. You've got to understand, this room was filled with heroes with decades of search and rescue operations, dozens of personal decorations and awards, and hundreds of lives saved. I learned that it was very rare for them to be thanked by those that they had saved. I went up to the microphone with Larry Barnett by my side. I quickly related the events of the Mayaguez operation and how we all owed our lives to those heroic pilots. I spoke of my ride to the USS Holt and how we were placed down in that tiny helipad and the amazing actions of that pilot that saved so many lives that night. I also related my years of staring at the ceiling, wishing I could somehow thank that pilot. I turned that into thanking all of them on behalf of all the other guys out there staring at their ceilings, wishing they could personally thank their heroes. I then called Bob Blau up to the podium and gave him the plaque that I had made and a big bottle of Crown Royal, from which we both took a swig. It was a very moving experience, one of the highlights of my life, and the start of our great friendship. We started getting together a few times a year, and as Larry's website grew, so did our circle of friends and fellow Koh Tang veterans. In 2005, we were contacted by a television production company to be interviewed for a 1-hour documentary on the History Channel. The series was called Heroes Under Fire. Now, our episode was titled Deadly Reckoning.
Which, if I may interrupt real quick, you can find this. Sorry, Dan, I may interrupt real quick. You can find this episode on YouTube. I'll put that link in the chat. Go ahead.
It was another life-changing event for me. Our story was being publicized, and the Battle of Koh Tang was being presented to the public and was soon to change from an event that nobody remembered or even heard of to something that we could be proud of. Also around this time, I was given a Papillon puppy to take care of. These special little dogs are very smart and loving. They can sense when you are down and will do all they can to lift your spirits. Soon I was using mine as a PTSD therapy dog, which greatly improved my situation. Soon our numbers had grown large enough that we formed the Koh Tang Mayaguez Veterans Organization and started scheduling our own reunion. Our goal was to help each other and to seek answers about those left behind. My involvement with my comrades completely turned my life around. I cannot stress strongly enough how beneficial getting together with each other has become to us. Instead of being withdrawn and not speaking of our experiences, guys were coming from all over the country. The therapeutic benefits of sharing this together are immeasurable. And if anyone sitting out there has held back becoming involved with a veterans group, such as the American Legion or the Marine Corps League or VFW, or actually going to a reunion or seeking out help, I say just do it. You will be so glad that you did. I strongly urge you to continue to do all you can for yourself and your fellow veterans. Seek out your brothers. We must continue to be strong advocates for proper health care and veterans benefits for all our veterans, and to insist on a complete accounting of our POWs and MIAs. That is the script of the keynote speech I gave to the American Legion 10 years ago, the National Convention in Indianapolis. President Obama was scheduled to speak. I was the keynote speaker just before him, and there were about 5,000 people there with the television cameras, and President Obama decided not to come at the last minute. But that speech was one of the highlights of my life as well. And those individuals that we had been mentioning, Larry Barnett, Tom Noble, Fred Morris, Al Bailey, and Bob Blau were all there at that speech as well. I have 4 or 5 points of information that I can add at this time, or do you want to go with questions and answers first?
Can we? I'm sorry, Sean. Yes, I think Sean was going to announce the same thing. Could we break in and take a minute for Ramel Nicholas to say a few words about Light to Unite, which is an initiative that he's a part of? And I'm sorry to interrupt the conversation, but I know that Ramel has to move along here. Ramel, you are the chair, the national chair of the National Flag Foundation, which is involved in a really big initiative for November 11th on Veterans Day. Do you care to let people know what this is?
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And just to begin, I'm humbled by what I just heard. I guess I was set to speak at the top of the hour, and there was a problem with unmuting me, but I had the privilege of staying on and listening to that gentleman speak. And I don't know him, but when you hear what I'm about to say, perhaps this break in the action, so to speak, is timely. My name is Ramel Nicholas. I'm an attorney in Pittsburgh. I'm the volunteer chair of the National Flag Foundation. The National Flag Foundation is a national, nonprofit, non-political foundation located in Pittsburgh. It was brought here over half a century ago to, I guess, what educational and corporate leaders called balancing the Keystone State. All of the sex appeal was out in Philadelphia or in the center part of the state, yet the western part of the state carries probably as much, if not more, of a rich history. In any event, they brought it here. It has quietly existed for many, many years, doing a lot of good from an educational standpoint under the radar. It started to falter to some degree. They brought me in and reconstituted the board. And as I said, we have a nationwide board for veterans on this panel. We have quite a few, both military and non-military folks across the country. We have a fellow from ESPN from California, the former head of Goodyear's Wingfoot division from Arkansas, General Dunn, who's a surgeon, former head of Walter Reed, and various others. Frankly, I'm probably the least pedigreed of those folks on the board, and I'm not a veteran. In any event, the National Flag Foundation's mission is to educate about the American flag and to honor those who serve to protect it. Over the last couple of years, we decided, because we try every year or two to have a major initiative. Usually those are quiet and we don't hear about them. Last couple of years, we focused on Purple Heart. The Purple Heart Award, as probably everyone on this call knows, has its 240th anniversary this year. We've been fortunate. We have partnered with a variety of organizations to bring attention to Purple Heart recipients. And again, as most on this call probably realize, as profoundly noted by the gentleman that spoke with his post-traumatic stress syndrome experience, that we're trying to bring attention to Purple Heart recipients, and much needed attention. We've partnered with the Military Order of the Purple Heart, which most of you know is the only nationally chartered Purple Heart congressionally chartered Purple Heart organization in the country. We also have partnered with the Marine Corps League. Commandant Baker recently at his national convention in Daytona did a formal resolution to support one of our sub-initiatives called National Light Up Night, which is what's on your screen. We also have partnered with just before I get back to it, we partnered with the National Football League this year. They've allowed us to announce the 240th pick in this year's draft, which happened in Las Vegas, and you can Google it, it's on YouTube. And during the Salute to Service games in November, the National Football League is asking their teams to find a way to honor Purple Heart. We put together a video, very expensive video, 30 seconds, that honors the Purple Heart. And we've been fortunate to get Jim Nance, the national sports broadcaster, to narrate it. He's the official voice of the National Flag Foundation, and the NFL's asked all their teams to show it. We also have legislation pending, bipartisan legislation. By year's end, we hope it gets adopted to bring more attention to the Purple Heart. You can Google that as well. Lastly, and most important, and the reason you were gracious enough to invite me, is for this Light Up Night, this National Light Up Night. It's November the 11th, Veterans Day. And the organizations I mentioned, plus the United Steelworkers Union of America, we believe the AFL-CIO by next week, and BOMA International, the Building Owners and Managers Association, along with the SIOR, the Society of Industrial Realtors, have all teamed together to have a national purple or red, white, and blue, if they can't light purple, light up night to honor Purple Heart. We have buildings all across the country. There are presently 27 cities that are committed to light buildings. The first building lit in America will be in Pittsburgh, the Coppers Tower, which will light red, white, and blue, followed by One World Trade Center in Manhattan. And then, according to time zone, buildings across the country. We also are very pleased that the Marine Corps League has decided that at select buildings across the country, as they light, they're going to have a Marine Corps League color guard posted to simply honor the Purple Heart initiative. The bottom line is that we're asking building owners, managers, et cetera, to light buildings, but we're also asking veterans to get out the word, because as the labor unions are doing, as a show of respect for Purple Heart and a show of solidarity around the country in these unfortunately very divided times, are asking citizens to make a special effort to fly their flags on Veterans Day. And if possible, talk it up amongst veterans and let it be a national movement, so to speak, which is what we're trying to achieve for solidarity. And I think what I've learned in talking to Commandant Baker, talking to the various VSOs, we have written support from almost every major veterans organization in the country for what we were doing. We're trying to send a message that, again, in these historically divisive times, perhaps for one day, America comes together. And I know it sounds hokey because people don't talk that way anymore. But I think that as I've championed this initiative and had so much support, it doesn't resonate as hokey to a lot of people. And I think that I'd maybe end by saying that the gentleman who spoke, my suspicion would be that he would find this initiative very, very significant. And I think for somebody that experienced what he experienced and what his fellow soldiers experienced, having America pause and take a deep breath and just say for one day, even though Veterans Day, a lot of people fly their flags, maybe make a special effort to have twice as many, 3 times, 10 times as many people fly their flag. And as the head of the United Steelworkers Union has said, not just at their homes, but now at their buildings, their construction sites around the country, they're going to make a special effort to do that. So the reason I believe I was invited and the message I would like to send, and I do not know how many veterans or veterans organizations this program tonight touches, but what we're trying to do is get the word out to veterans around the country that this is happening. We didn't want it to happen and veterans not know. And it's almost top heavy because we have so much going on from a high level, but yet we have had difficulty finding ways to reach the veteran themselves. So that's it. I apologize if I went a little long. As I say, I'm appreciative of being on the call. I probably don't deserve to be in light of the pedigree, as I said, that's on this call, but appreciate the opportunity and humbled by the experience.
Thank you so much, Ramel. And people could go to nationalflagfoundation.org. That's nationalflagfoundation.org and learn more about Light to Unite and about what the National Flag Foundation does. Thank you so much, Ramel. I hope to see you again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me.
All right. Take care.
Thank you for that, Ramel. And Dan, we're back to you, and we'll be looping in Fred and Tom and Robert as well. But you said you had about 5 points that you would like to add.
Yes, the first one, we talked about how screwed up the operation was in the very beginning. But there were a lot of errors made, but we fought our way out of it and got out of there. And in fact, at the time was declared a huge American victory. The word was put out that you can't mess with the United States, and we're still going to stand even after our defeat in Vietnam. But the lessons learned were used by the Joint Service Commands and the Rapid Deployment Force. The errors were actually taught in a special class at the Army War College. And after our operation, it was never that Air Force helicopters would move Marines. It would be only if they'd been trained together and practiced together and knew how to insert somebody into a hot LZ, etc. So there were quite a few lessons learned from our operation. We're pretty proud of that. A couple interesting notes. From the moment the red flag went up is the term that 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines got the word, get your guys together, you're going into combat. From the moment that flag went up, we were quickly thrown together, flew to Thailand, flew that next morning into Koh Tang, and then flew off of Koh Tang that night. From the first initial announcement until the last helicopter pulled out was less than 48 hours. It's called a 48-hour war or a 14-hour war. It was only 14 hours of battle. But of the staff NCOs and officers who had been in Vietnam, they said it was the worst and heaviest firefighting they'd ever seen. As I said, these were highly experienced Khmer Rouge Marine troops. The island itself, and of course the CIA didn't know this, was in dispute. Vietnam and Cambodia, and it's right on the borderline between the two states, were both claiming that they owned the land, but the real reason was that they thought there was oil there, and that's why there were so many Cambodians defending the island. Another interesting point about our operation, and I've said this for years, and no one has ever been able to dispute it or change my mind, is we are the only operation that has ever occurred that had all 6 of the branches of the U.S. service involved. Of course, the Air Force didn't come into being until 1947, but we had the Marines were brought in by the Air Force helicopters and supported by the Navy. There were Army troops involved. There was actually an Army interpreter that spoke Khmer, Cambodian. He was on one of the helicopters that landed with the first wave. This is interesting. He refused to get out of the helicopter, flew back to Thailand and was immediately discharged, never seen of again. But the Army was involved. The Coast Guard was involved. There was a U.S. Coast Guard C-130 helicopter that had been tracing and watching the transport of the Mayaguez after it captured. But there was also Lieutenant J.G., officer of the deck on the Holt, that was a Coast Guard officer that was in training and serving with the Navy. And then the Merchant Marine. There were 6 Merchant Marine guys who were taken off the Greenville Victory and dropped off by helicopter onto the Mayaguez to get us started up and fired again. Now, I'm sure there were huge operations that involved many branches of service, but as far as I know, this is the only one that had ever had all 6, including the Coast Guard and the Merchant Marine, involved in one operation. The biggest thing that happened was the dropping of a BLU-82 Daisy Cutter. It's a huge bomb, $15,000 slurry bomb. 6 of them were flown over by the Air Force, and they wanted to drop them. The purpose of dropping it in the jungle was it would actually blast a hole big enough to be a LZ for helicopters. It would literally explode so much and blast so much it would knock down all the trees and foliage and be able to land a helicopter in there. One of those was dropped on Koh Tang in the early afternoon, and we didn't know it was coming. I was standing there very near to, there's a picture of it. I was standing very near to Colonel Austin, our battalion commander, and we're watching it. It's pushed out of the back of a KC-130 on a pallet with a parachute. And at first we thought resupply was going to be dropped. We needed water and ammo desperately, but it was beyond our range. And then there was a huge explosion that actually shook the island. And everything got very quiet for about 15, 20 minutes. There was no return fire, no nothing. It was a very interesting experience. I was knocked off my feet, and we absolutely did not know that it was coming, but that was the BLU-82 Daisy Cutter. The remains of the people, of the bodies that were in Knife 31. Knife 31 was the one that was shot down on East Beach, first wave, first thing in the morning. And there were 13 that were killed in that helicopter. After the battle, the helicopter with the waves drifted out to sea and was in about 50 feet of water. No one touched it until 1995 when JPAC went in and built coffer dams around the remains and pumped and piped everything out of there and got a whole lot of human remains. Of course, they were all in one pile in the bottom. Using the DNA they had in 1995, they were able to identify 7 Marines. These were primarily through skulls or thigh bones. And those portions of remains were returned to those families. 2 or 3 had funerals in their own hometowns. 2 or 3 were buried in Arlington. 2005, working with Congressman Joe Wilson from South Carolina, we went to JPAC, and all the rest of those remains that they had kept were reevaluated. With the 2005 DNA technology, they were able to identify 90% of what they had. And that was primarily toe bones and finger bones and small pieces and fragments. The problem was that they say, Mrs. Copenhaver in Maryland, we have more remains of your son, but they've already had a funeral. They've already buried the remains they had. What are they supposed to do with it? And for a couple of years, this was all bounced around, and they had the remains of 13 was Marines, Air Force, and Navy corpsmen. And they, after much consternation and difficulty, the Koh Tang Mayaguez Veterans Organization, which I was president at the time, we were able to work out a deal, and all of those remains that were repatriated in 1995 and reevaluated in 2005 were buried together in one coffin at Arlington International Cemetery, and they all have one combined headstone. The veterans of Knife 31. The only other thing I've got to talk about is Bob Blau's flight. I occasionally see on Facebook a picture of an Army Chinook helicopter. There you go. That's where they were buried. That's not the headstone they have, but that's from Arlington at their site. The helicopter that Bob flew, I lost my train of thought. Oh, I've seen pictures of a Army helicopter. I think it's a Chinook in Afghanistan, and he's got the ramp down and he's touching the ramp on the roof of a hut, and guys are getting on it, similar to the last extraction of Saigon. And everybody says, what an amazing pilot, what an amazing feat. This guy's fantastic, greatest flying I've ever seen. Well, then I pop in and tell him about Bob Blau, how he did it in the dark, flying forward at a 45-degree angle with 50% power on the wheels in a limited space. We once went with a group of veterans to Patuxent Naval Air Station in Maryland, where they have the Navy top pilot school. It's like a Top Gun for the Navy. And we were relating the story, and these Top Gun pilots, who are the best that the Marine and Navy pilots had, were relating the story, and they're sitting there with their jaws open. They couldn't even believe it. So that is an amazing feat of flying by a great American hero. He was awarded the Silver Star for his actions, and we actually believe he was very shortchanged. But he's a hero and a friend, and Bob Blau, and you should talk to him for a minute.
Jerry, you have your hand up, and I think that elicited a question from you. Can you hear us?
Gary?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jerry, and I'm just wanted to clarify something about the landing zones that are Daisy. There's the picture coming out with the parachute is off the screen, and there's what's the call? I can't think of it. Ben knows these thing that's the bomb is separating from the rails that were stranded on the rails. The thing I wanted to point out was that for all practical purposes, the publications of the reason for using it was to create landing zones for helicopters. Now, I remember dropping a couple of those, and the pressure wave is about 1/4 of a mile in diameter. And if there's anybody living inside that 1/4 mile, there's no brains left from the pressure wave. So I just thought I'd add that on. We never knew that. I mean, we never really revealed that publicly, or I'm just making a supposition myself that we knew what the pressure wave did. And that's about it. Thanks for letting me share that, and God bless.
Yeah, Jerry's career Air Force, served on C-130s, was part of missions or operations that dropped these Daisy Cutter bombs, these BLU 82s. Was the Mayaguez incident the last time they were dropped in war?
No.
Okay.
No, they've been used in I think they were used in Afghanistan.
Okay,
I've been told
that recently. Okay.
Yeah, and maybe somewhere else before that. But that's
says
pretty
that-
hush-hush.
Brad says
Yeah.
they used them in Desert Storm.
Yeah, that's yeah.
And they're a little unusual because they're pushed out of the back of a C-130, a cargo plane, and that's not with a.
No, there's a strap. There is a very strong strap that holds that bomb into the airplane, and that is there's a guillotine that cuts that when it's time to release it. There's pilot parachute that will pull the chute out, and then the chute opens, and it's all timed so that it drops down to about 900 above terrain where it blows up.
Thank you, Jerry.
And real quick, there's a question in here from Larry, but before that, Scott Millen over on the Facebook side said, my battalion, 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines was on air alert on Camp Lejeune when this happened, the Mayaguez Koh Tang incident. We packed our gear, signed power of attorney, and were standing ready to deploy when this happened. While waiting for choppers, they stood us down. Says that was the closest he ever got to being shot at. Thank you, Scott, for chiming in on Facebook. Larry, you had a question here in the chat. Did you want to unmute and ask that, Larry? Let's see here.
Yeah, Sean and I have taken up the power of muting and unmuting because we don't know what you guys are going to say.
We also just like to play God.
No, those of you, seriously, we had a problem with a Zoom bomber about a month ago, and we don't want to repeat that.
Yeah, Larry, you are unmuted.
Yeah, I had a question. I've done programs about Vietnam. I was in Vietnam in 67, 68, and Air Force Security Police. And when I found out about the Mayaguez, I also heard that there was, after all of the extraction and everything that you described, Dan, there was also a helicopter where they had taken, I think it was 12 or may have been more, security police volunteer that were being sent to try to extract the 3 Marines that were left. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, because I've only read the story. So I wanted to see if you could kind of fill some information in, because I know the helicopter crashed and they were all killed as well.
Go ahead.
There was a security police helicopter that died. They were originally going to send them in instead of the Marines, and that helicopter crashed, and then they went to plan B. But afterwards, there was no other helicopters.
I thought there was a SEAL team, maybe not a helicopter, but a Navy SEAL team that went in to try and find the 3.
There was discussion am I on?
Yep.
Yes.
There was discussion the next day. I was on the bridge. There was a Navy Lieutenant JG with a SEAL team. The Navy Admiral wanted him to go in under white flag with no weapons. And the Navy Lieutenant JG said he refused to do that. So they did not go in.
They did not go in. Okay.
Going back to the previous question, as the difficulties with the Mayaguez were unfolding in the very beginning, as I said, there were no troops anywhere to do anything. Some Air Force general has decided we're going to send security police. So he put together 18 security police, I guess it was out of Utapao, and a 5-man air crew. They were going to go onto the island and rescue the crew. That was the plan. It would have been horrible if they had tried. They were not combat Marines. They were Air Force security people. And unfortunately, that helicopter crashed. And those 18 Air Force policemen and the 5-man helicopter crew, all those names are included among the 41 on the wall. But that was actually on May 13th, they crashed.
As a side note on that Blue 82, Tom Ryder, he was on the Wilson at one of our last reunions. He says, by the way, he said, I had a brand new, I don't remember, was it 8mm, 16mm, whatever. But he said, I had this brand new movie camera and I happened to be standing on deck, and he recorded that and then never showed it to anybody. He says, you think anybody would like to see that? And I said, yeah. So he had it digitized and it's up on kotang.com, but you can watch that come out of that and come down the explosion. It looks like a big mushroom cloud right from on ship. And I don't know how many of those have been recorded, but that in live action and combat, it's pretty neat to watch that. It's on kotang.com.
I just put that here in the chat, Fred. And Fred, we were chatting briefly before the program started. And real quick before I ask this question, Robert Blau, can you hear us? I know that you might have been having some mic problems.
Yes, I was having problems, but I think I finally figured it out. Can you
Okay,
hear me?
great. Yes, we can hear you. And real quick, Robert, before we get to you, Fred, we were talking about before the start of the program, you were the youngest. How do we say it? The youngest
I
serving?
don't know if I was the youngest, but I was the very last person to receive a Purple Heart coming out of, I was the last person to enter the helicopter. I'm the last helicopter leaving, and I was wounded on the way to the helicopter. So I have to be one of the last people of the Vietnam era to be wounded.
So the last Purple Heart of the Vietnam War is yours.
Yes.
That's how I would put it. The last, you received the last Purple Heart of the Vietnam War. And also, and the other point is, I think now that you are the youngest veteran of the Vietnam War.
Now.
Oh, come on. You were 18 in 1975. Right?
We believe Fred, can you hear me? We believe
Yeah.
Fred is the youngest combat veteran. He was 3 or 4 days past his 18th birthday when he went into combat on May 15th, 1975. There were guys
that?
67, 68 who were 16, 17 years old, but that was in 1968. In 1975, he's the youngest combat veteran.
Yep. We're labeling you that, Fred, whether you like it or not.
But Fred, you also mentioned before the program that you were 18 years old. You were 3 days out of boot camp, right?
Yes.
Oh.
I just arrived on Okinawa on the day that I was sent to Golf Company is the day we went on alert and went to Koh Tang.
Wow.
What was going through your head?
Well, all the guys that have been there for a while said, "Hey, don't worry about this. We go on alert all the time." And, you know, it's all posturing and we're not going nowhere. Well, then when we got on the airplanes, they go, "Well, I don't know." And then when they handed out grenades and stuff, things got a little serious.
And as you were getting out of the helicopter on Koh Tang, how did you get a lay of the land? What was, you were right out of boot camp. What were your thoughts?
Well, right out of boot camp, you're invincible. You're young and dumb. It would be the best way I can describe it. But I was handed a rifle on the way to the cattle cars taking us to Kadena. And this thing looked like, well, I don't want to say it looked like it'd been through a war because it had. It was a Vietnam, but it was the old 3-pointed bayonet, and it really looked nasty. Well, I haven't got to shoot it or anything, and it did not have a extractor, so the shell extractor was broke. So I could shoot one shot, and then I had to break the weapon down, pull out the bolt, pry the round out of the chamber every time I was trying to shoot. So it was, not exactly something you wanted to go to battle with.
And you were a part of that the East Beach invasion.
I was West Beach.
Oh, we were West Beach. I'm sorry.
First helicopter in, last one out.
And as all of the
About an hour, they were the only ones there.
Yeah. How did you guys organize yourselves once you landed? So you were on just under heavy fire, helicopters being hit. It was pure chaos.
Basically in survival mode, just keep your head down. And they were not concentrated on us too much, believe it or not. They were actually just trying to shoot the helicopters down. So they would, the big weapons, they pretty much would shut down. They was small arms fire and lots of that. But the big machine guns, they waited until the helicopter committed to a hover, and then they would just annihilate it. And so as the helicopters were flying around, they were not shooting too much then even. They waited until that thing got to the beach, committed to a hover to where they had a really dead target sitting there, and then they just blistered them.
George Canis, you put in the chat, you have a question for Dan. George, I'm gonna unmute you.
Unmuted?
Yep,
Can you
you're
hear
good.
me?
Go ahead.
Dan, there's a little mention of the Mayaguez guys. Did any of your Marine troops ever get to meet the Mayaguez captives?
I personally met a couple of them at reunions later on, but we did, Goff Company in 29 did not go on or near the Mayaguez. There were some Marines from Delta 14 who were dropped on the Mayaguez, and they stayed with the ship as it was first towed out and then got underway on their own.
Great, great. So you saw them at reunions then,
Yes, yes.
and they knew what you were doing or tried to do.
Extremely grateful. They appreciated us immensely, buying us drinks. There was a book out at the time. They were all signing it for us, etc.
Very good, interesting.
Over the years, about 5 of them, including Captain Miller.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Fred,
Hey, you know,
yep. Sorry, go ahead.
oh, you go ahead, Sean.
I was gonna say, Rod Gianna put a thing in the chat here for Fred. Fred, weren't you able to swap out your bad rifle for another one when you were on the island?
Yes. But that, we were the only ones there for an hour. So I wasn't able to switch out until we had, somebody didn't need one anymore.
Yeah.
And Ron Gianta, you also had something else you wanted to add after Ramel Nicholas spoke. We usually take a little station break at 8 o'clock. It's 8:11 here. Let's do that. Ron Gianta. Oh, I have to unmute you. Sheesh. Okay. Which means I've got to find you. Hey, Joe Griffey's good to see you again. I see you, Bamboo Bob. There you are. All right. There you go. Hey, Ron.
Yeah, Todd, the only thing I was trying to do was to share with the legal folks points of contact with the Veterans Benefit Administration in Pittsburgh as they try to institute like a Purple Heart event for Veterans Day of who the contacts are for the VA. And I sent a message to that guy, personally to that guy that was talking that had to leave.
Okay.
But, you know, if you talk to him again, give my email and I can still guide him to some people at the VA who may be interested in helping, because I know the VA sponsored a Purple Heart event in Erie a couple of years in a row.
You got it. That's exactly what I'm going to do, Ron. Thank you so much for offering that. Boy, you're very generous in offering your contact information to people, and you always respond. I appreciate that, Ron.
Sure.
I do want to let people know we have a VBC blood drive, Vitalent Blood. If you donate blood and you say you want a donation going to the Veterans Breakfast Club, they will send us $15. It's nice. So give blood, give a pint, give 2, give 5. I mean, you've got some blood to spare, give it. And then the BBC gets $15. We also have coffee, and you can go on our website, veteransbreakfastclub.org, or you can just email me and order some coffee from Bamboo Bob Coffee. And because $2.89 goes to the Veterans Breakfast Club for every pound of coffee that you buy. And guess who we have on the program tonight, beaming all the way from Da Nang, Vietnam, where it is, let's see, 7:13 a.m. tomorrow. We have Bamboo Bob himself. Let me get you unmuted here, Bamboo Bob. Live and in person. I've got to find you. Oh, there you are. Sheesh. There you are. Okay. Do you know what we call you,
everyone?
Bamboo? You know, we call you young. That's what we call. I'm looking for the young guy. So how are you,
Thank
Bob?
you. I am excellent. Thank you. And hello to everyone. It's a great honor to join you. That story, I knew nothing about that. I've been to the island of Phu Quoc, which is now controlled by Vietnam, but I didn't even know of the island that we're speaking of here. So the whole story is just as always, just amazing. And so I really appreciate it. And so since you've unmuted me, Todd, I'm just going to go and do it. Please, I'm heading off to the coffee harvest a bit south of here. We pack it up, we send it to the US and use it for a whole bunch of great reasons. We're helping the farmers here and we're helping the club back there. And the last thing I would say is just come and join us. We got just opened up a new clubhouse here in Da Nang. And if you're ever in Vietnam, and I hope you are, please come and join us. You've got everything's on the house. I have no Crown Royal here, but a lot of coffee and some decent tea. I guess we could probably get some Crown Royal if you give me a bit of notice. I think that's a Canadian brand, by the way, and I'm Canadian, so that should.
We can
that
tell
should
you're
help.
Canadian, Bamboo Bob.
So please, everyone's welcome. We'll host you, and if you get a chance, come to see Vietnam and let me know, and we'll take care of you when you're here.
Well, wouldn't you know, Bob, that we are doing a trip to Veterans Breakfast Club is doing a trip to Vietnam in 2023. We're leaving November 27th. We're leaving the US and we're going to do 2 weeks in Vietnam. And we would love to visit the farms that you work with. I believe you work with only 12 farmers in Vietnam that grow this coffee. And it's special coffee. It's wonderful coffee. And the proceeds go to the families and to the farmers, a little bit to us, a little bit to you, and the rest of it goes to the farmers. And we're grateful for the work you do in Vietnam, Bob.
Thank you. Thanks all.
So I'm going to be in contact with you about our trip to Vietnam. This will be our third trip back to Vietnam with veterans and others. Anybody can join us, but boy, is it fun. I see Chad, I see Ben. You guys went on that trip before, and it's a heck of a lot of fun. So, and it's educational. So I look forward to seeing you in Vietnam next year, Bob. And then one more thing that I'll add is that we have our magazine. We do a quarterly magazine. It has hit most mailboxes already. It goes out every quarter. This is our fall issue. I think a lot of people received it on Saturday. Sean, you received yours on Saturday. I received mine on Saturday. And we send out 7,700 of these to addresses. If you don't get one at home, it's because we don't have your address. We send it free of charge. And we also ask people like Jerry Gagins, who came to my house and picked up a box. And he's taken it in 2 boxes. He's taken it to a reunion that he's having at the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, Wright-Patterson. This is how we get the word out about our programs. This is how people find the Veterans Breakfast Club. And it's also how we put the stories that we hear online and in person in print and send it out. You can see Sandy Ortega is our cover girl, I guess you would call her, for our fall VBC magazine. If you want to receive it at home, just send me an email, todd@veteransbreakfastclub.org. That's Todd, TUDD@veteransbreakfastclub.org. And then finally, we have a feedback survey. Would love you to take the survey. If you can, I will put this URL in the chat here. It's just 3 simple questions. What do you think of the program? What'd you like, didn't like? How can we improve? All right, back to you, Sean.
Thank you so much, Todd. And I'd like to pop over to Bob Blau now. Robert, this one was one of the things that, out of the incredible amount of heroic stories that stood out to me throughout this whole history lesson, I would call it, as I've been researching it. This amazing feat of flying, as Dan put it, it's unbelievable. Can you talk us through a bit on the talent required to be able to fly and land on a ship this size, and what you were experiencing that day?
Oh boy. You talking to Bob?
Bob, yes.
Yes. That whole night for me was a new experience. For one thing, about half the helicopters in the operation were Air Force rescue helicopters. And we had all been trained in getting people out of trouble. One of my fellow pilots in the Jolly Greens was one of the first helicopters to land the Marines on the West Beach. And he said, when they landed, they were sitting there waiting for the Marines to get off, and one young Marine was just standing by the side of the helicopter underneath his window. And Bob Doobie was the co-pilot's name. He said, we've been trained to get people out of trouble, not put people into trouble. And about that time, the mortars rounds started hitting, and they had to leave. But that was what the rescue portion of the Air Force helicopter crews. We hadn't been trained in none of the guys have been trained to work with Marines. Didn't know much about their tactics or anything. Just from some professional reading I had done, I knew that the Marines tried to land sideways to the bad guys, so that the Marines that were offloading could have a little temporary protection. And but most of our guys didn't know that. We were trained to always turn the tail to the bad guys, because that was the smallest target. And if somebody took out the cockpit, the whole crew would die. So the poor Marines probably expected to land sideways to the bad guys, but instead we landed tail first and offloaded Marines off the tail right inside of the bad guys. We lost a few that way. And the flying at night, this is way before night vision goggles were developed. So we were flying around in the dark at night, almost by feel. And that's how we got into to get the Marines at night on the island. And well, what we did was basically wave hopped to avoid silhouetting ourselves against the sky at night, so they couldn't see this darker shape coming in. And then we just basically feel our way. I felt the waves tugging at the landing gear a couple times when I got too low on the way in.
That's what I was going to ask. When you say feel your way, like, how do you feel that as a pilot? And it's if you're too low, you feel the water.
You feel the water, and you don't feel the tree until it's too late, if you happen to run into one of those. But we basically felt our way in until we saw a little bit of lighter gray in the black surroundings, and that indicated that we were close to the beach. So we basically felt our way into the beach. But there's trees right behind the beach. And I still remember the first landing. We're sitting there on the ground waiting for our Marines to get on, and watching the fireworks going off all around us, the red tracers and green tracers. And there you are in the cockpit of a helicopter, feeling pretty naked because you're surrounded by plexiglass. And then that's when I realized I forgot to put my flak jacket on. So then I felt even more naked. But after we got the last Marine aboard, that first lift took off, and don't know who suggested it, whether it was the forward air controller or somebody on my crew. I have no idea who suggested it, but said, "Okay, can you land on the Holt?" And I said, "Well, yeah, sure." And then we got to the Holt and realized how small it was. And they didn't want me to land. They wanted me to hover over the Holt. And I thought they meant me to hover with my tail over the Holt, so we could offload the Marines from the tail. But I wouldn't have had a hover reference. All I could see was black in that case. So I begged and begged and begged, and the flying captain, I think it was Commander Rogers, the captain of the Holt, said, "Okay." And I said, "Thank you, sir." And I knew he was taking a big risk, because if we had hit anything hard with our rotors, it would have been a disaster. But we stuck our way in there. I had a great crew. The flight engineers and pararescuemen were in the back were talking me down, telling me where my landing gear was, about how far my rotors were from the superstructure of the ship, and we just snuck in there. And I remember telling my PJ and the tail on the tail gun, don't let any of those Marines get off the back ramp, because that's where they came on and that's where they're going to expect to go off. And he did his job. He wouldn't let any. In fact, the biggest Marine I've ever seen was trying to get past him, get out the aft ramp when we were on the ship, and that ramp was hanging out over the water. He wouldn't have lasted, 5 minutes. But we got them all off, and and headed back to the island. The second load, if anything, it was even darker, more challenging landing. It took a while to get us on the beach. When we got there, we had one landing gear on a rock because it was high tide, and very small landing zone. And there was again, kicking myself for forgetting again to put on my flak jacket.
Robert, what?
Seemed like forever.
How did you remain calm in that? When tracers are coming in, have you ever been described as having nerves of steel?
Calm is not the exact word for it. It was just getting those poor Marines. I knew we only had 3 helicopters flyable left, and we had to get almost 200 Marines off the island in the dark. And it's just good training. Like I said before, the crew was great. All worked together just like we trained.
How long had you been flying when the Koh Tang incident happened?
Oh, let's see. It was about. I was about 2.5 years out of flight school. But I was only flying at age 53 for less than a year. But I was already an instructor pilot, first lieutenant. So the flight at night in the dark, close to the ground, was a whole new experience for all of us.
You got that, Dan? Hold on, Dan Hoffman. I'm going to ask you to unmute. You have a question?
I have a comment. They say that the Marines have brass balls, but we call Bob stainless or stainless steel, even stronger than hard. Sure.
I have to admit, my little brother was a Marine at the time, and the last I heard of him, he was in California, but who knows? But I had a little extra incentive.
Jerry Gagens, you have your hand up.
Yeah, real quick. How did you handle the fuel management and bingo? Anybody have problems bingo fuel? Thank you.
In the Jollies, we were fortunate enough to have air refueling capability. We had a C-130 tanker in orbit over the island. The guys in the 21st Special Operations Squadron, they didn't have that capability. Instead, they had 600-pound, two 600-pound auxiliary fuel tanks. Ours were only 350. But they had to really manage their fuel. And I know for a fact that several of them landed back in Thailand on fumes.
You were overweight. How drastically does that shift the maneuverability of the helicopter?
Fortunately, we had already burned off a lot of our fuel. So, a pound of fuel is worth a pound of Marine. And the helicopter handled great. No complaints with that. And we appreciated all the extra power. Yeah, that made it easy.
So you got the second load of Marines loaded up, and where did you head after that?
Somebody asked me if we were going back to the Holt, and I said, I'm not going to try that again. I had an awful lot of help. I didn't know his name at the time, but I had an awful lot of help doing that the first time. And I didn't want to risk it again. Plus, on our second landing, we, like I said, we didn't see the beach until the very last second. So I dragged my tail rotor through the water, trying to slow down enough to land on the beach. That ingested a lot of salt water into the turbine engines. And I don't know if you know, but the Navy guys and the Marine guys know about this. Salt water in a jet engine, they don't mix well. It tends to burn off the water and coat all the engine compressor blades with salt. So you lose power that way. I didn't know if I had enough power left to hover over that little ship again. So we went to the Coral Sea, which was a good idea because in hindsight, we had several stretcher cases of wounded Marines. And of course, the carrier had a lot more room and space to treat them.
I see that we're here at time at 8:30. We can go a couple minutes past, Todd.
Yeah, and we cannot end the show without having Dan Hoffman reveal the fun fact about his glass eye. I think this is the most remarkable thing that one of the most remarkable things I've heard in a while. Dan, you have a glass eye. Here, Sean, let me share my screen.
Sure.
Because I found another Marine with a glass eye that's like Dan's. And so the people, and Dan could let us know if this is kind of what he has. Here's a Marine who lost his eye in the Battle of Fallujah in Iraq. And he had a glass eye put in with the anchor and globe, the Marine Corps insignia. Is this like yours, Dan?
It's exactly like that, except mine is solid gold. That looks like it's from a tie tack or something. Mine is just the globe and anchor. I had a detached retina due to stress, PTSD, and I'm blind in the right eye. I do wear a glass eye with the Eagle globe and anchor in it for reunions and Marine Corps birthday balls and such. It's a big hit.
I was gonna say, do you get double looks at Starbucks or like? And what do you say when someone like sort of looks at you? Do you acknowledge it, or you just like cool as a cucumber?
I usually go right up in their face and say, "Look me in the eye."
That is a Marine right there. Oh, thank you, Dan.
I'll tell you, when the Marine Corps retired Dan, they did it prematurely. He was a hell of a Marine.
Yeah.
Hoorah.
It is.
Hey, before we go, I want to say hi to Ren Bergman. Hi, Ren. I haven't seen you in a long time. Great. Thanks for joining us again here from Texas. John Crawl. Good to see you, John. Thank you for joining us. This is great. Joe Griffey's is on, and I just connected. I tried to connect Joe Griffey's and Scott Masters so that when Scott is down in Eastern PA, Joe might be able to connect him with some veterans in that area. And I know some of you on here know Joe Griffey's from his Welcome Home radio show. Tom Wiley, B-17 pilot, World War II, with his son Jim. Hey, Tom Wiley, good to see you, Tom. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for having Tom on, Jim. I appreciate that. And we have Rick Everington. Good to see you again, Rick. Thank you for joining us. Another great Marine. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. This is terrific. And then, Joe Griffey's here. Let me unmute you here. Yeah, and if somebody wants to say something, please just raise your hand.
Yeah. We'll get to you, Dan, in just a sec. Joe, go ahead.
Joe, you're gonna have to unmute. There you are.
Yeah. Two fast questions. Do we know what were in the containers on the Mayaguez incident? Do we know what they were hauling? What was on the ship?
I don't think we do. Not specifically. Does anybody know? I don't believe it's been
General
disclosed.
supplies. It was nothing secret.
No secret, no weapons. It was just stuff that had been evacuated from Saigon out of the headquarters and buildings and such. Nothing classified, nothing secret, no weapons as far as we know.
Okay, my second question is with Joe, Danny, and Gary. Is it true that Joseph Nelson Hargrove is one of 31 sets of brothers that died in Vietnam? And that was one of the reasons why his parents were so adamant about trying to get his remains to be buried with his brother. Is there any truth to that?
I don't know of him having a brother. He had a cousin.
Cousin, I was told that it was a brother that the mother and father wanted reunited. Do we know where Gary, Danny, and Joe Nelson Hargrove, where their remains are today?
Their remains have never been recovered. However,
No.
Gary Hall, they found a burial site on the island that had his flak jacket with his name on it and a few other personal items that were buried. And there was DNA with them that his body had been there. But at some point they had dug the body up and it was not there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Wow. What
I would,
fantastic
add
information.
something to
Yes.
that, Dan.
Robert?
Yeah. The last, after I took my second load to the Coral Sea, I headed back to the island and met up with one of the other, two of the other helicopters. One was in picking up last load of Marines, and the other one was another Jolly Green. And after Grims picked up the last load of Marines and head back to the Coral Sea, our headquarters told us, okay, you've got the Marines tell us you've got all the Marines, you head back to Thailand. And before I could say anything, Wayne Purser and the other helicopter said, "Are you sure?" And after a short silence, they came back and says, "Yes, we're sure. The Marines say they've got everybody they need, that everybody accounted for." For years, on the long flight back to Thailand, I had this gut feeling that we'd somehow let the Marines down, either through our own inexperience in their type of operations or whatever. I just, for years, I lived with this gut feeling that we'd let those Marines down. And it wasn't until years later that I found out we had, in fact, left 3 Marines behind. And Dan could attest that, and my wife can attest that that hit hard. But it wasn't for not trying. We headquarters said go home, and we've got everybody, so we did. But headquarters obviously didn't know either.
Dan, I want to let you know I've been muting you because we've been getting some interference from your signal here. Ren Bergman, I unmuted you.
And I want to
Let's go to Ren and then Dan.
Getting some interference from your signal here. Ren
Oh.
Bergman, I unmuted you.
I'm going to mute you now, Ren.
And then Dan.
All right, there we go. Now I'll unmute Dan because we're getting feedback from you, Ren. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, situation, the 3 left behind. They had been an Echo Company. Golf Company was the lead company. They went in the first wave. Echo Company, 2 platoons, came in at 12:30 in the afternoon, and then they were the first ones extracted about 4:30. So they had very little time on the island. When the Echo Company commander got aboard the helicopter, he reported to the Golf Company commander that the Echo Company commander had all of his Marines. And that was what we were told, and that's what we knew. The Golf commander didn't go looking for somebody that wasn't his, that wasn't supposed to be there. That was part of the problem. They were supposedly on the far, very right, very south end of the perimeter with the machine gun team. And why they never extracted or went to the helicopter when they were supposed to, we don't know. Initially, we were told they had to be dead and killed before the extraction. But we learned later that that was not likely true.
Okay. Thank you, Dan.
You didn't, I wish you would speak for a few minutes with Tom Noble if he's still there.
Oh,
He
yeah.
was, I'm sorry, he was on the Wilson and they used the captain's gig, the little fancy officer's boat with the M60 machine guns on it. He's left. He was another hero that day.
Tom, you can hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can
Okay.
hear you.
Okay, just a couple of things. First off, if you really want to see excitement, you should have seen the day at my house when Dan Hoffman put his eye in my wife's hand. That was eventful, to say the least. A couple other things I wanted to say to the gentleman that raises the coffee in Da Nang, and he said it was fun. I was in Da Nang and Chulai and Quang Viet in '68 on boats. It wasn't so much fun then, I'll say that much. But about the operation, a couple of things to clear up. First of all, Captain Rogers was the captain of the Wilson, Bob. Sorry to correct you, buddy, but
Okay.
and
Well,
I
thank you.
don't know. I don't know the name of the captain that was on the Holt at the time.
I did it one time. But can't remember
Yeah.
now.
Okay, number two, or three or four, whatever. The night we had come back to the ship, what had happened is that we'd made 3 runs on the gig that day. We'd taken a lot of fire. We were on the way back to the, after we got back to the ship, which was way after dark, it was probably 2200 or so at that time. I get called to the wardroom, me and another fella who were both riverboaters in Vietnam, and said, you guys are going to have to go back in. Possibility to leave 3 guys behind. You may be taking a SEAL team rather than going in yourself this time. So we had 3 or 4 guys that said that they had because they were all volunteers, and said they had a lust for life while we were taking that fire in there, and they didn't want to go back in. So we had to get some different volunteers to get ready to go back in. And then as I was training a couple in our little bitty helo hangar on M60, we got called and said, nope, everybody's dead. You don't need to go back in, but we did go back in and hail. We did not have a Khmer Rouge linguist on board. Don't know Viet. Back to the guy in Vietnam. I still speak Vietnamese halfway decent, but the thing is that we didn't have anybody, but we did go in and hail on the Wilson, and we did say we got a guy with a tape and got that transmitted over HF back to us, saying all we want to do is recover any remains that we have, and we don't mean any more hostility and so forth. But we stayed approximately 4 hours steaming back and forth on the island on both East and West Beach, and we saw no one. And but I agree with Dan and Bob. One of the most, there's no worse way to die on the face of the earth than the way the 3 young Marines did. And it'll haunt all of us for the rest of our lives. We know that. And by the way, you can't find better Marines than Dan Hoffman and Fred Morris sitting there, and you'll never find a better Air Force pilot than Mr. Bob Blau.
I guess a final question, just to sort of wrap up this this program tonight, is how do you all, despite being sort of, like you say, you said haunted by this, the 3 guys that were left, how do you honor them by as you year to year as you continue to move on? Dan, I'll ask you to unmute.
When we have our reunion, we have a reunion every other year. We just had one in Las Vegas in this past May. We honor all of the fallen. We call out their name and salute them at a dinner, and they have a place setting at a special table. They mean a lot to us. They always have. We're in touch with the families, and we're still involved with, it's not JPAC now, it's POWA Accounting Office. We had a guest speaker this year, one of the individuals that's gone back to Koh Tang a half a dozen times. They are still searching for their remains.
Todd, any final thoughts here?
No, I just want to thank you all for joining us and sharing this story, because it should be better known than it is, but it's so clear that coming 2 weeks after the fall of Saigon, the country simply did not have the stomach to absorb this dramatic story that was coming out of a place that, you know, Americans had just felt like they had poured 10 years of blood, sweat, and tears into. And I appreciate you keeping the story alive and educating and inspiring us tonight.
Honor and a privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Bob and Tom. And thanks to all of you for joining us. And we'll see you a week from tonight. And we'll be talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962. And we'll see you, George Kniss. See you there. All right. Take care.
Guys.